Do not let the king find me." The words were barely louder than the winter wind, but Alpha King Adrian Blackwood heard every one of them. He stood motionless beneath the snow-covered pines, staring down at the young woman he had discovered half buried beside a fallen tree. Her face was pale from the cold, her chest rising with shallow breaths, and one trembling hand was still wrapped around the edge of his coat, as though she had used the last of her strength to deliver that warning. Adrian had been riding the northern boundary before the storm when his horse suddenly refused to continue along the trail. Minutes later, he had found her footprints disappearing beneath fresh snow. He had followed them nearly half a mile into the forbidden forest before finding her alone. Now darkness was falling, the storm was growing stronger, and the nearest royal outpost was more than 12 miles away. "You are safe?" Adrian said quietly. Her eyes opened for only a second. They were blue, frightened, and unfocused. "No, king," she whispered. "Please." Adrian looked toward the white forest surrounding them. He should have told her immediately who he was. Instead, he removed his heavy outer cloak and wrapped it securely around her shoulders. "My name is Adrian." It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth. She seemed to relax at the sound of an ordinary name. "Emily," she managed to say before her eyes closed again. Adrian carefully lifted her and started toward the hunting lodge located several miles south of the boundary. Every instinct told him that something was wrong beyond the obvious danger of the storm. Emily wore no pack insignia. She carried no travel papers. Her boots were worn from a journey far longer than a single night, and whoever she feared had apparently convinced her that reaching the Alpha King would be worse than freezing alone in the forest. By the time Adrian reached the lodge, snow had covered the road behind them. He carried Emily inside, lit the fireplace, and contacted the elderly physician who lived closest to the Northern Territory. The storm made immediate travel impossible, so the physician guided Adrian through the safest steps for keeping Emily warm and stable until morning. Hours passed. Adrian remained near the fire, watching for every change in her breathing while the wind struck the windows. Shortly after midnight, Emily stirred. "Where am I?" "A hunting lodge near Blackwood Territory." Fear immediately returned to her face. "Blackwood." She tried to sit up, but exhaustion forced her back against the pillows. Adrian kept his distance. "The roads are blocked. You cannot safely travel tonight. You do not understand." "Then help me understand." Emily stared at him as if deciding whether one stranger could be trusted more than whatever waited beyond the storm. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." Adrian's expression remained calm. "Who is looking for you?" She shook her head. "I do not know anymore." The answer unsettled him more than a name would have. Emily closed her eyes again, but her fingers tightened around something hanging beneath her coat. Adrian noticed the small silver pendant only when it slipped into view. A black wolf surrounded by 3 stars. His breath caught. He knew that symbol. He had seen it once as a child on a sealed document his father had ordered removed from the royal archive. Adrian looked from the pendant to the frightened woman lying before him. Suddenly, finding her in the forest no longer felt like chance. Emily opened her eyes and saw where he was looking. She immediately covered the pendant. "You recognize it?" Adrian did not answer quickly enough. Her fear deepened. "Who are you?" Outside, thunder rolled beyond the mountains as the storm closed every road leading away from the lodge. Adrian knew the truth would eventually have to be spoken, but for tonight, the woman who had begged him to hide her from the king was trapped beneath the same roof as the man she feared most. Emily kept her eyes on Adrian, waiting for an answer he was not ready to give. The fire moved softly behind him, filling the hunting lodge with warmth that had not yet reached the fear in her expression. "I told you my name," he said. "That was not what I asked." Her voice was weak, but the suspicion inside it was unmistakable. Adrian looked toward the windows, where snow pressed against the glass and erased the world beyond the lodge. "I belong to Blackwood." Emily's fingers tightened around the silver pendant. "That could mean anything. Tonight, it means I know these woods. I have access to this lodge, and I can keep you safe until the roads open." Emily studied him carefully. "You keep saying safe as if you know what I am running from." "I do not." "Then stop promising things you cannot know." The words struck him with unexpected force. Few people spoke to Adrian that way. Kings received obedience, caution, and carefully measured disagreement. Emily offered none of those things because she had no idea who stood before her. Strangely, Adrian found the honesty refreshing. He moved away from the bed and placed another piece of wood on the fire. Fair enough. I can promise only that no one will enter this lodge tonight without your knowledge. Emily remained silent. Sometime before dawn, the elderly physician finally arrived after traveling the last few miles with a local guide. Dr. Samuel Hayes examined Emily and confirmed that exhaustion and prolonged exposure to the cold had weakened her severely, but rest, warmth, food, and time should allow her to recover. She should not travel for several days, Samuel told Adrian quietly near the kitchen. Perhaps longer. Adrian glanced toward the bedroom door. Can she remember how she reached the forest? Do not pressure her. Memory can become confused after extreme exhaustion and fear. When Emily woke later that morning, Adrian brought her warm soup and placed it on the table beside her. She looked at him suspiciously. Does everyone in Blackwood personally deliver breakfast? Only when the staff is trapped 20 miles away by a snowstorm. A faint smile appeared before she could stop it. Adrian noticed, but said nothing. Over the next 2 days, the storm continued. Emily slowly regained enough strength to walk through the lodge, although she remained guarded whenever Adrian asked about her past. She remembered her name. She remembered traveling north. Everything immediately before entering the forest came in broken fragments. A train station. A dark road. Someone telling her to turn back. The image of a royal seal. Then nothing. Adrian contacted Blackwood through secure messages, but told his counsel only that the storm had delayed his return. He did not mention Emily. Each evening, they sat near the fire while the wind moved through the trees outside. Emily began asking questions about Blackwood. Adrian answered carefully, never lying, but never revealing the truth she feared. Have you met the Alpha King? She asked one night. Adrian almost smiled at the absurdity of the question. Yes. Emily looked into the fire. What is he like? Complicated. That usually means powerful men have people making excuses for them. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You have strong opinions about someone you have never met. Emily touched the pendant at her throat. His family destroyed mine. The room suddenly felt colder despite the fire. Adrian said nothing. Emily continued quietly. My father was accused of betraying Blackwood when I was a child. The order carried the royal seal. After that, our name became something people whispered. Adrian felt an old memory surface. The pendant. The sealed document. His father's command that certain records never be opened again. Emily looked directly at him. That is why I cannot let the king know I am alive. Adrian's pulse slowed beneath the weight of those words. Before he could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the lodge door. Emily froze. Adrian stood. No traveler should have reached them through roads still buried beneath nearly 3 feet of snow. The knock came again. Then a voice called from outside. By order of the Alpha King, open the door. Emily turned toward Adrian, terrified. Adrian stared at the entrance. He had issued no such order. Emily moved instinctively toward the far side of the room, but Adrian raised one hand, signaling for her to remain where she was. Do not answer, she whispered. Another knock struck the heavy wooden door. Royal authority. Open immediately. Adrian crossed the lodge with controlled steps, his expression changing in a way Emily had not seen before. The quiet stranger who had carried soup and kept the fire burning suddenly seemed taller, colder, almost impossible to challenge. He stopped several feet from the entrance. State your name and command. Silence followed. Then the voice outside answered. Captain Daniel Mercer, Northern Patrol. Adrian knew every captain serving Blackwood. There was no Daniel Mercer. Show your credentials through the side window. The visitor did not respond. Seconds later, footsteps moved away across the porch. Adrian waited until the sound disappeared beneath the wind before checking through the narrow window. 2 figures were retreating toward the tree line, their dark coats quickly vanishing into the falling snow. He did not follow. Leaving Emily alone while strangers searched the area would have been reckless. Instead, he secured the door and returned to the main room. Emily was standing now, one hand gripping the back of a chair. They found me. We do not know that. They came to an isolated lodge during the worst storm of the season using the king's name. They found me. Adrian could not argue with that. Then we stay inside until I know who they are. Emily stared at him. Why are you helping me? The question was simple, but Adrian had no simple answer. At first, she had been a stranger dying in his forest. Then she became a mystery connected to his father. Somewhere between those moments, something had changed. He had begun listening for her footsteps each morning. He noticed when she finished an entire meal because it meant she was recovering. He knew she preferred the chair beside the eastern window because the morning light reached it first. None of that was duty. Because leaving you alone would be wrong, he finally said. Emily looked away, almost as if kindness made her more uncomfortable than suspicion. Later that afternoon, Adrian received a secure message from Blackwood. His chief advisor, Marcus Hale, reported that no Northern patrol had been dispatched to the hunting lodge. More troubling, someone had accessed restricted travel records showing Adrian's location shortly before the storm. Adrian deleted the message before Emily could see it. He did not want to frighten her further, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone inside Blackwood knew where he was. Someone had sent strangers using his authority. That evening, Emily sat beside the fireplace wrapped in a wool blanket while Adrian prepared coffee in the kitchen. "You are terrible at pretending nothing is wrong," she said. Adrian glanced toward her. "I thought I was convincing. You have been staring at the same cup for 5 minutes." He set it down. Emily gave him the faintest smile. For a few seconds, the fear between them disappeared. Adrian sat across from her, maintaining the distance she seemed to need. "Tell me something you remember that has nothing to do with Blackwood." Emily considered the question. "My mother grew roses." "What color?" "White." She said everyone expected red roses to be beautiful, so white ones had more freedom to surprise people. Adrian smiled. "I think I would have liked your mother." Emily's expression softened. "I think she would have liked you." The words settled quietly between them. Emily seemed surprised by her own admission, and Adrian felt something unfamiliar tighten inside his chest. Then her expression changed. Her hand moved to the silver pendant. "I remember something." Adrian leaned forward. "What?" "The train station. Someone was waiting for me." She closed her eyes, searching through the broken memory. "He told me my father had been innocent." Adrian became completely still. Emily opened her eyes again. "And he said the proof was hidden inside Blackwood Palace." The proof was inside Blackwood Palace. And for the first time since Adrian had found her beneath the snow, Emily looked less frightened than determined. "Do you remember who told you?" he asked. She pressed her fingers against her temple. "An older man. Gray hair. He knew my father. His name? I cannot remember." Frustration crossed her face. Everything comes back in pieces. Adrian wanted to ask more, but Dr. Hayes had warned him not to force memories that were still returning naturally. "Then we work with what you remember." Emily looked at him sharply. "We?" Adrian held her gaze. "Someone came through 3 feet of snow pretending to carry orders from the Alpha King. Whatever happened to your father is no longer only history." Emily studied him as though trying to understand why an ordinary man connected to Blackwood would speak with such certainty. Before she could question him, the sound of an engine came faintly through the forest. Adrian moved to the window. A black utility vehicle appeared between the trees, following the newly cleared emergency road toward the lodge. This time, Adrian recognized the royal markings immediately. "Who is that?" Emily asked. "Someone I trust." The vehicle stopped outside, and Marcus Hale stepped onto the snow-covered path with 2 members of the royal security detail. Emily saw the insignia on their coats and immediately backed away. Marcus entered the lodge, removed his gloves, and looked directly at Adrian. "Your Majesty, the southern road is finally open. We should return to the palace before the next storm arrives." Silence filled the room. Emily did not move. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second. This was not how he had intended her to learn the truth. Marcus noticed her expression and immediately understood his mistake. "Your Majesty?" Emily repeated. Her voice was almost empty. Adrian turned toward her. "Emily, you are the Alpha King." "Yes." She stared at him, disbelief giving way to anger. "You sat across from me for 3 days while I told you I was afraid of you." "I know. You asked about my father. Because I wanted to understand. You already understood more than you told me." Adrian did not defend himself. "That is true." Emily walked toward the bedroom and returned moments later wearing her coat. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. "Away from here." Adrian immediately stepped aside from the doorway instead of blocking it. Emily stopped, clearly expecting resistance. He reached into his pocket, removed the lodge key, and placed it on the table. "The road is open, but you are still recovering. You may stay here as long as you choose. No guards will keep you inside." No order will force you to Blackwood Palace. Emily looked at the key, then at him. Why should I believe anything you say now? Adrian absorbed the question without looking away. You should not believe me because I am king. You should decide based on what I do next. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, the Palace Council is expecting you. Then they can continue expecting me. Adrian turned to him. Find out who accessed my travel records and who sent those men here. Quietly. Marcus nodded. Emily remained near the door, her hand resting on the handle. Outside, the wind had weakened, but snow still covered miles of forest. She could leave. Adrian had made certain of that. Yet after several long seconds, she released the handle. I am staying until Dr. Hayes says I can travel safely, she said. Not because I trust you. Adrian nodded. Understood. Emily looked toward the fire, then back at him. And when I am strong enough, I want access to the records about my father. Adrian knew exactly what those records might reveal about his family. He also knew that refusing her would prove every fear she carried about him. You will have them. Marcus looked at Adrian in alarm. Those archives were sealed by your father. Adrian's expression hardened. My father is no longer king. Emily stared at him, surprised. Adrian turned toward the window, where Blackwood Palace waited beyond the mountains. For the first time, he understood that keeping Emily alive had been the easy part. Helping her uncover the truth might require him to dismantle everything his own family had taught him to protect. By morning, the storm had weakened enough for Dr. Hayes to return and examine Emily again. He found her stronger, but not ready for a long journey through mountain roads. 2 more days, he told her. Then, if you continue improving, you may travel. Emily accepted the decision without argument, though Adrian could see impatience behind her eyes. She wanted answers now. So did he. Marcus had returned to Blackwood Palace before sunrise with instructions to investigate the false patrol and prepare the sealed archive records. Adrian remained at the lodge. Emily noticed. Kings usually have kingdoms to run, she said as she stood near the eastern window, watching snow fall from the pine branches. They do. Then why are you still here? Adrian set a folder on the table. Because someone used my authority to find this lodge, and until I know why, leaving you here alone would be irresponsible. Emily turned toward him. You could send guards. I could. But you did not. Adrian met her gaze. You do not trust them yet. The answer silenced her. She had expected him to explain his own decision, not acknowledge hers. For the rest of the afternoon, they spoke carefully, rebuilding something that had been damaged when his identity was revealed. Emily asked about Blackwood Palace, the Royal Council, and the sealed archives. Adrian answered every question he could. When she asked about his father, however, his voice became quieter. King Richard believed stability mattered more than almost anything. Including truth? Emily asked. Adrian looked toward the fire. I am beginning to wonder. That evening, Marcus sent the first results of his investigation. The false patrol had used an old royal authorization code retired 7 years earlier. Only senior officials with access to archived security records could have known it. Adrian read the message twice before locking the device. Someone connected to the old administration was still operating inside Blackwood. Emily watched him from across the room. Bad news. Complicated news. She almost smiled. You use that word often. Adrian sat opposite her. The men who came here used a security code from my father's reign. Emily's expression changed immediately. Then this is connected to him. Possibly. You still sound like you are protecting him. The accusation was quiet, but Adrian felt it. He was my father. And mine lost everything because of him. Adrian leaned back, absorbing the distance between those two truths. What was your father's name? Jonathan Carter. Adrian froze. The name was familiar. Not from public records, but from childhood. He remembered standing outside his father's study when he was 12, hearing an argument behind closed doors. Richard Blackwood had shouted that Jonathan Carter had forced his hand. Another man had replied that Carter had saved the crown. Adrian had forgotten the conversation until now. You know that name? Emily said. Adrian did not lie this time. Yes. She stood. From where? A conversation I overheard as a boy. Emily stepped closer to the table. What did they say? Adrian searched the memory. Someone told my father that Jonathan Carter had saved the crown. Emily stared at him, her breathing suddenly uneven. Then why was he called a traitor? I do not know. Your father knew. Yes. The answer settled heavily between them. Emily turned away, fighting the emotion rising in her face. Adrian wanted to comfort her, but he remained where he was. She had already lost control over too much of her own story. He would not decide when she needed his closeness. After a long silence, Emily spoke. When I was 11, my father told me that powerful people sometimes rewrite the truth because admitting what really happened would cost them more than destroying an innocent person. Adrian lowered his eyes. He may have been right. Emily looked back at him. If those records prove your father framed mine, what will you do? Adrian answered without hesitation. I will make the truth public, even if it damages your family, especially if my family caused the damage. For the first time since learning who he was, Emily looked at Adrian without fear or anger. Something softer appeared there, fragile but real. Before either could speak again, Adrian's secure device sounded. A message from Marcus filled the screen. The sealed archive had been opened during the night. One file was missing. Jonathan Carter's. Adrian read the message again, then turned the screen toward Emily. She crossed the room and stared at the words without speaking. The file carrying her father's name had survived years inside a sealed royal archive, yet it had disappeared only hours after Adrian ordered it released. Someone knew we were looking, she said. Yes. Someone close to you. Adrian did not deny it. The archive requires 2 separate authorization codes. Marcus is checking every person who could have entered. Emily looked toward the windows. The snow had stopped, revealing a pale morning sky beyond the forest. Then staying here is not protecting me anymore. Adrian understood immediately. You want to go to Blackwood. I want the truth. Those may not be the same thing. They are now. Dr. Hayes had planned to clear her for travel the following morning, but Emily was already moving more steadily. Adrian could have ordered her to wait. Instead, he contacted the doctor and requested another examination. Several hours later, Hayes reluctantly approved a carefully paced journey, provided Emily rested along the way. By afternoon, a royal vehicle arrived with Marcus and a small trusted security team. Emily stood outside the lodge wearing Adrian's heavy winter cloak over her own coat. For several seconds, she looked back at the building where she had awakened believing Adrian was only a stranger. You could stay here, he said. That is not an order. It is an option. Emily looked at him. I spent most of my life living with the consequences of a decision someone else made about my family. I am finished waiting for other people to decide when I deserve answers. Adrian opened the vehicle door for her and stepped aside. Then we find them. The journey to Blackwood Palace took nearly 4 hours through mountain roads still lined with deep snow. Emily spoke little, but Adrian noticed her watching the landscape as the forest gave way to open valleys and distant towns. When the palace finally appeared against the mountains, her expression tightened. I imagined this place differently, she said. How? Colder. Adrian glanced at the enormous gray stone structure. Give it time. Emily laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. For one brief moment, the missing file, the old accusation, and the dangers surrounding them seemed far away. Adrian realized he wanted to hear that laugh again. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. At the palace, Emily was given private rooms near the Eastern Library rather than the royal wing. Adrian made certain the choice was explained to her, not imposed. She could lock the doors herself. She could request assistance or refuse it. No one would enter without permission. That evening, Adrian brought her to the restricted archive. Marcus was waiting beside the empty space where Jonathan Carter's file had once been stored. We found no forced entry, Marcus explained. Whoever removed it had authorized access. Emily examined the shelf. Was there anything else connected to my father? Marcus hesitated. One item. He placed an old inventory ledger on the table. Beside Jonathan Carter's file number was a handwritten notation, transferred by order of King Richard Blackwood. Beneath it appeared another reference number. Adrian recognized the format immediately. That is not an archive number, he said. It belongs to the private royal vault. Marcus looked at him. Your father's personal vault has been sealed since his death. Emily turned toward Adrian. Can you open it? Yes. They crossed the palace to a chamber beneath the former king's study. Adrian entered the authorization code and opened the heavy vault door. Inside were dozens of boxes, private letters, and documents untouched for years. Emily stepped forward, then stopped. On the center table rested a single envelope that appeared far newer than everything surrounding it. Her name was written across the front. Emily Carter. Adrian and Emily exchanged a stunned look. She reached for the envelope, but paused before touching it. How could my name be here if this room has been sealed for years? Adrian looked at the unbroken dust surrounding the older boxes, then at the clean surface beneath the envelope. Someone had entered recently. Emily slowly opened it. Inside was a short handwritten message. She read the first line, and all color left her face. Adrian moved closer, but did not touch her. What does it say? Emily lifted her eyes to his. My father knew your father was going to accuse him. She looked back at the page. And according to this, he agreed to take the blame. Emily read the message again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change if she gave each word enough attention. It did not. Her father had known the accusation was coming, and according to the letter, he had accepted it willingly. That makes no sense, she said. Adrian stood across from her in the private vault, equally unsettled. Why would an innocent man agree to destroy his own name? Emily unfolded the remaining pages. Most were written in a careful hand she recognized immediately. This is my father's writing. Her voice softened. I remember watching him sign birthday cards with these same letters. Adrian said nothing as she continued reading. The letter explained that years earlier, Jonathan Carter had uncovered a conspiracy involving several powerful regional leaders who intended to remove King Richard from power. Exposing them immediately would have revealed the identity of a protected witness whose family would have been placed in danger. Jonathan had agreed to appear responsible for leaking royal information while Richard quietly dismantled the conspiracy. The arrangement was supposed to last only months. Then something changed. My father expected his name to be cleared, Emily whispered. But it never happened. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father kept the lie alive. Marcus examined the inventory ledger. There may have been a reason. Emily looked at him sharply. There is always a reason when powerful people decide someone else should pay the price. Marcus lowered his eyes. Adrian did not correct her. Instead, he searched through the box beneath the envelope and found a second document bearing Richard Blackwood's personal seal. It was an unfinished order restoring Jonathan Carter's honor. The document had never been signed. Adrian stared at it for a long moment. He intended to reverse the accusation. Intention did not give my father his life back, Emily replied. Adrian looked at her. No, it did not. Her anger weakened into grief. She stepped away from the table, breathing slowly as years of certainty collapsed around her. Her father had not betrayed anyone, but neither had his sacrifice been simple. He had chosen silence, believing a king would eventually keep his promise. Adrian moved toward her, then stopped several feet away. Do you want me to leave? Emily looked surprised by the question. After a moment, she shook her head. No, it was the first time she had asked him to stay without necessity forcing them together. Adrian remained beside her in silence. Minutes passed before Emily spoke again. There was someone at the train station. Adrian turned toward her. The man you remembered? Yes. Her eyes narrowed as another memory surfaced. He said my father had protected a witness. He told me that witness was still alive. Marcus became alert. Did he give you a name? Emily closed her eyes. The station returned in fragments. Fluorescent lights, cold rain beyond the windows, an old man sitting across from her with trembling hands. Then a name. Eleanor Price. Marcus immediately reached for his phone, but Adrian stopped him. Use no palace network. If someone accessed the archive, we assume internal communications are compromised. Marcus nodded and left to search through an independent channel. Emily looked at Adrian. You believed me before you had proof. I believe that you deserve the chance to find it. That is not the same thing. Adrian held her gaze. No, something passed between them, quiet and difficult to name. Emily looked away first. Later that night, Marcus returned with an address. Eleanor Price was alive, living under another name in a small town 60 miles west of Blackwood. But there was something else. Someone had searched for her location less than 24 hours earlier using the same retired authorization system connected to the men at the hunting lodge. Adrian immediately understood. Whoever had taken Jonathan's file was no longer trying only to hide the past. They were looking for the last person who could explain it. Emily reached for her coat. I am going with you. You are still recovering. She knew my father. Adrian wanted to refuse. Every protective instinct demanded it. Then he remembered the key he had placed on the lodge table and the promise he had made without speaking it aloud. Emily's choices belong to Emily. Then we leave at first light, he said. She nodded, but before turning away, she looked at him with unexpected softness. Thank you, Adrian. Not your majesty. Not Alpha King. Just Adrian. And for the first time in his life, the simpler name felt like the greater honor. At first light, Adrian and Emily left Blackwood Palace in an unmarked vehicle with Marcus driving and only one trusted security officer following at a distance. The winter sky remained gray, but the roads were clear enough to reach the small town where Eleanor Price had lived quietly for nearly 2 decades. During the 60-mile journey, Emily watched the passing fields in silence. Adrian sat beside her, close enough to notice when she became tired but careful not to treat her recovery as permission to make decisions for her. You can tell me if you need to stop, he said. Emily glanced at him. That sounded almost like a suggestion. I am learning. A small smile touched her face. Slowly, when they reached the address Marcus had found, they discovered a modest white house at the edge of town. No royal vehicles waited outside. No guards. Nothing suggested that one of Blackwood's oldest secrets lived behind the ordinary front door. Marcus remained near the vehicle while Adrian and Emily approached together. An elderly woman answered after the second knock. The moment Eleanor saw Emily, her expression changed. Jonathan's daughter. Emily froze. You knew my father? Eleanor opened the door wider. I have been waiting a very long time for you. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and cedar. Old photographs covered the walls, but Eleanor led them directly to a small study and removed a locked wooden box from a cabinet. Your father saved King Richard, she told Emily. But that was never the entire story. Adrian stood completely still. Eleanor explained that the conspiracy against his father had reached far deeper into the royal council than official history recorded. Jonathan discovered that several advisors planned to manufacture evidence against Richard and force his removal. Eleanor had worked as an administrative clerk and accidentally found the documents proving it. Jonathan protected her identity by claiming responsibility for accessing restricted information. He believed Richard would expose the conspirators once I was safely hidden, Eleanor said. Emily's voice tightened. But Richard never cleared his name. Eleanor looked toward Adrian. Because by then, Richard had learned that exposing everyone involved would reveal how close the crown had come to collapsing. He chose the reputation of the throne over the reputation of the man who saved him. Adrian felt the truth settle like weight across his shoulders. His father had not simply broken a promise. He had built stability upon Jonathan Carter's silence. Who else knew? Adrian asked. Eleanor opened the wooden box and removed a collection of letters. One man helped Richard bury everything. His chief advisor. Adrian looked at Marcus through the study window, then back at Eleanor. Marcus was not serving the palace then. Not Marcus. Eleanor placed an old photograph on the desk. Adrian recognized the man immediately. Victor Hale, Marcus's father. Emily looked from the photograph to Adrian. Hale. Before Adrian could answer, the front door opened. Marcus entered the house, his face unusually pale. We need to leave. Adrian stepped into the hallway. Why? Marcus held up his phone. Someone has just released documents claiming Emily fabricated the evidence against the royal family. Emily stared at him. No one outside this room knew we had found Eleanor. Adrian's eyes moved slowly toward Marcus. The silence became unbearable. Marcus understood what Adrian was thinking. I did not tell anyone. Your father helped bury the original truth, Adrian said. Marcus looked stunned, but something deeper appeared beneath the surprise. Recognition. Emily saw it too. You knew, she whispered. Marcus closed his eyes. I knew there was a secret. I did not know what it was. Adrian's voice hardened. Start explaining. Marcus looked toward Eleanor, then at the letters on the desk. My father left me instructions before he died. He said if Jonathan Carter's daughter ever returned to Blackwood, I was supposed to keep her away from the royal archives. Emily stepped back as if the room had suddenly changed around her. You knew who I was from the beginning. Not when Adrian found you, but when I saw you at the lodge, I recognized the pendant. Adrian remembered Marcus arriving through the snow, calling him Your Majesty in front of Emily, exposing the identity Adrian had hidden. At the time, it had seemed like an innocent mistake. Now it looked different. Did you send the men to the lodge? Adrian asked. Marcus shook his head immediately. No, but I know who may have. He reached into his coat, and placed an old sealed letter on the table. My father warned me there was one person Richard feared more than the conspirators themselves. Emily looked at the name written across the envelope. Her returning memories suddenly connected. The train station. The warning. The voice telling her to run before she reached Blackwood. She whispered the name before anyone else could speak. Councilman Robert Vance. Adrian stared at her. Robert Vance was not merely a member of the Royal Council. He was the man who had advised Adrian since the day his father died. For several seconds, no one in Eleanor Price's study spoke. Robert Vance had stood beside Adrian at coronations, council meetings, and every crisis that followed King Richard's death. He had been the calm voice urging caution whenever Adrian questioned decisions inherited from the previous reign. Now Emily remembered that same man warning her away from Blackwood. "Tell me exactly what happened at the train station," Adrian said. Emily closed her eyes. The memory returned more clearly than before. She had been traveling north after receiving an anonymous message claiming someone could prove her father's innocence. At the station, Robert approached her before she boarded the final train. He knew her name. He knew about the pendant. He told her that Blackwood would never admit what had happened to Jonathan Carter, and that reaching the palace would place her in danger. "I believed he was helping me," Emily said. "He told me to take the eastern road through the forest and meet someone at an old ranger station." Adrian understood immediately. "There is no active ranger station on that road." Emily nodded slowly. "When no one came, I realized something was wrong. Then I saw headlights following me. I left the road and kept walking until the storm erased the trail." Adrian's expression hardened, but his voice remained controlled. "Robert knew exactly where you would be." Marcus opened his father's sealed letter. Inside was a handwritten warning explaining that Robert Vance had been part of the original conspiracy against King Richard. Unlike the others, Robert had escaped exposure by secretly helping Richard identify his fellow conspirators. In exchange, his involvement disappeared from every official record. "My father knew," Marcus said quietly. "He helped maintain the silence because Richard believed exposing Robert would reopen everything." Eleanor shook her head, and silence gave Robert another generation of influence. Adrian looked toward Emily. Her father had sacrificed his name to protect a witness. Adrian's father had protected the throne by refusing to correct the lie. Marcus's father had inherited the secret. Robert had inherited the power. Every man involved had made decisions they believed history would eventually forgive, while Emily had inherited only the consequences. "We return to Blackwood," Adrian said. Emily immediately faced him. "And then what?" "We release everything." "Everything." "Your father's letter, Richard's signed order, Eleanor's testimony, and the records connected to Robert." Marcus looked concerned. "If you do that without a complete investigation, Robert will claim you are using royal authority to destroy a political opponent. Then we establish an independent investigation." Emily studied Adrian carefully. "You already decided." Adrian heard the change in her voice. "I thought that was what you wanted." "The truth is what I want." She stepped closer. "But every time something happens, you decide the next move before asking me. This is my father's name, Adrian. My life is already being discussed publicly because someone released those documents." He started to respond, then stopped. She was right. He had promised to respect her choices, yet the moment danger appeared, he had returned to thinking like a king who believed responsibility gave him the right to decide first. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Emily seemed surprised that he had corrected himself so quickly. "I want the evidence protected. I want Eleanor safe. And I want an investigation that neither you nor Robert can control." Adrian nodded. "Agreed. There is something else." Emily looked directly into his eyes. "Until this is finished, whatever is happening between us cannot influence what you do." Adrian became still. Neither of them had spoken openly about the growing connection between them, but denying it now would have been dishonest. "You think I am doing this because I care about you. I think you care enough that I cannot tell where justice ends and I begin." The words hurt because Adrian understood them. He had found Emily in the snow and spent every day since trying to keep her safe. Somewhere along the way, protecting her had become personal. "Then I will remove myself from the investigation," he said. Emily stared at him. "You would do that? If the truth is real, it should survive without a king controlling it." For the first time, Emily had no immediate answer. Adrian turned toward Marcus. "Contact 3 independent regional judges. Give them unrestricted access to the evidence." Marcus nodded. Adrian then looked back at Emily. And when they reach a conclusion, I will accept it publicly, even if that conclusion destroys my father's legacy. Emily's expression softened, but before she could speak, Eleanor placed another photograph on the table. There is one problem, she said. The photograph showed King Richard, Jonathan Carter, Victor Hale, and Robert Vance standing together outside Blackwood Palace. Beside them stood a fifth man Emily recognized instantly. Her breath caught. That is the man who sent me the anonymous message. Adrian looked at Eleanor. Who is he? Eleanor's answer changed everything. That was the protected witness Jonathan sacrificed his name to save. Emily stared at the fifth man in the photograph, and another piece of her memory returned with startling clarity. His name was Samuel Grant. He had contacted her 3 weeks earlier through an anonymous letter, promising proof that Jonathan Carter had never betrayed Blackwood. Yet Samuel had never appeared at the meeting place. Robert Vance had reached Emily first. If Samuel is alive, he can explain everything, she said. Eleanor slowly nodded. He disappeared after Jonathan accepted the accusation. Richard arranged a new identity for him, but I lost contact with him years ago. Marcus examined the photograph. If he contacted Emily recently, he wanted the truth exposed. Or someone wanted her to believe that, Adrian said. Emily looked at him. You think the message was false? I think we verify everything before trusting another invitation. This time, he did not decide what came next. He waited. Emily noticed. We find Samuel, she said, but through the independent investigators, not the palace. Adrian nodded. Agreed. By that afternoon, 3 regional judges had accepted responsibility for the inquiry. Adrian signed an order granting them unrestricted access to royal archives, then formally removed himself from all investigative decisions. Robert Vance was temporarily suspended from council duties pending review, though no public accusation was made against him. The decision immediately created questions throughout Blackwood, but Adrian refused to shape the investigation through public statements. Emily watched him surrender control over a matter capable of defining his reign. Does this frighten you? She asked that evening as they stood in the Eastern Library. Yes. His honesty surprised her. I was raised to believe a king prevents uncertainty. And now, Adrian looked through the tall windows toward the city below. Now I think powerful people sometimes create the greatest damage by pretending uncertainty does not exist. Emily moved beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. Their connection had become impossible to ignore, yet both understood that the truth between their families had to stand apart from whatever they felt for each other. When you found me in the forest, Emily said, I thought surviving was the only thing that mattered. Adrian turned toward her. And now I want my life back. Not the life my father lost. Mine. Adrian felt the words settle deeply inside him. Then that is what you should have. Emily studied his face. Even if that life takes me away from Blackwood. The question hurt more than he expected, but his answer came without hesitation. Even then, her expression softened. She reached across the small distance between them and placed her hand over his for only a moment. It was not a promise. It was something quieter, perhaps more meaningful because neither of them demanded anything from it. The moment ended when Marcus entered carrying a sealed report from the independent investigators. They found Samuel Grant. Emily immediately turned. Where? He has been living under the name Samuel Gray in Vermont for 19 years. Marcus placed the report on the table. He agreed to speak with the judges by secure video tomorrow morning. Adrian remained silent, honoring his decision to stay outside the investigation. Emily opened the report herself. Samuel had already provided a preliminary statement confirming that Jonathan Carter protected him during the conspiracy. But one sentence near the bottom changed the direction of the case. Emily read it twice. Samuel says Robert Vance was not the person who ordered my father to take the blame. Marcus frowned. Then who did? Emily continued reading, her face slowly losing color. Adrian stepped closer, but waited for her to speak. Samuel says my father proposed the plan himself. The room fell silent. Emily shook her head. No, there has to be more. The following morning, she sat before the secure screen with the 3 judges while Adrian remained outside the room. Samuel appeared older than the man in the photograph, but Emily recognized him immediately. His first words were an apology. Then he told her the truth. Jonathan had discovered that exposing the conspiracy too early would endanger dozens of innocent families connected to witnesses. He volunteered to carry the accusation temporarily, believing he could protect them while Richard removed the conspirators quietly. But when the danger passed, Richard refused to clear Jonathan because doing so would expose how deeply the crown had been compromised. "Your father saved me," Samuel said. Then the king betrayed the promise he made to him. Emily closed her eyes. The truth was more complicated than the story she had carried for years, but one fact remained unchanged. Her father had sacrificed his reputation willingly. Richard had chosen to make that sacrifice permanent. Then Samuel leaned closer to the camera. "There is something else you need to know, Emily. Robert Vance sent you toward Blackwood because he wanted you to uncover the truth." Emily stared at him. "Then who sent those men to the lodge?" Samuel's answer came quietly. "Someone who knew that if you found me, you would discover King Richard was not the last person protecting the secret." Samuel's final words remained in Emily's mind long after the secure call ended. Someone had continued protecting the secret after King Richard's death, and that person had known enough to track her movements, access Adrian's location, and remove her father's file before the truth could surface. The independent judges immediately expanded their investigation. Adrian kept his promise and did not interfere, even when every instinct urged him to demand answers. For 2 days, Blackwood Palace became strangely quiet as investigators reviewed security records, archive logs, and private correspondence from the previous reign. Emily spent most of that time in the Eastern Library, reading every document concerning Jonathan Carter that had survived. Adrian visited only when invited. On the third morning, Emily found him standing outside the library with 2 cups of coffee. "You know you are allowed inside," she said. "I know. Then why are you waiting?" Adrian handed her 1 cup. "Because you once told me powerful men make decisions before asking." A faint smile touched her face. "You remembered." "I remember most things you say." The simplicity of his answer made her look away. Before either could continue, Marcus approached with a sealed report. He gave it directly to Emily rather than Adrian. "The judges asked that you receive this first." Emily opened the envelope. The investigation had identified the person who accessed Adrian's travel records and authorized the false patrol. It was not Robert Vance. It was Charles Whitmore, the longtime director of royal records and one of King Richard's most trusted private secretaries. Adrian recognized the name immediately. Charles had supervised the archives for more than 30 years. "Why would he do this?" Emily asked. Marcus handed her another document. "Because he was the person who convinced Richard never to clear your father." The evidence showed that Charles had repeatedly warned Richard that restoring Jonathan's reputation would expose the crown's past vulnerability. After Richard died, Charles continued hiding records to preserve what he called institutional stability. When Emily returned, he feared the entire history would become public. "So he sent those men to frighten me away," Emily said. "According to their statements, they were instructed to bring you to a private meeting," Marcus replied. "They were told not to harm you." Adrian's expression remained cold. "That does not make impersonating royal authority acceptable." Emily looked at him. "But you are not deciding what happens to him." Adrian held her gaze. "No, the independent court will." That answer mattered more to her than he realized. Days later, the investigation released its findings publicly. Jonathan Carter was formally cleared of every accusation of treason. The official record acknowledged that he had voluntarily protected witnesses during a political crisis and that King Richard had failed to restore his reputation after promising to do so. Charles Whitmore was removed from his position and referred to an independent court for abusing restricted records and royal authorization. Robert Vance was cleared of involvement in the false patrol but admitted publicly that he had concealed parts of the historical truth for years. He resigned from the council. Then Adrian stood before Blackwood without excuses. He did not blame only his father. He did not claim that a new king was innocent of an old system. He acknowledged that the crown had benefited from Jonathan Carter's silence long after the original danger had passed. Emily watched from the side of the chamber as her father's name was spoken with honor for the first time in years. She expected triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter. Relief. When the chamber emptied, Adrian found her alone beside the tall windows. "It is done," he said. Emily looked at him. "No. It is finally true." Adrian nodded. She stepped closer. "You gave up control when keeping it would have been easier. You taught me that protecting something and controlling it are not the same. Emily's eyes softened. And if I leave after this? Adrian felt the question before he answered it. Then I will be grateful I found you in that forest long enough to see you choose where you go next. Emily looked down, emotion tightening her voice. That is the problem, Adrian. What is? She met his eyes. Somewhere between surviving that storm and finding the truth, leaving you became harder than staying. Adrian said nothing, because love, he had finally learned, was not a moment to claim. Emily reached for his hand. For several quiet seconds, they stood together without titles, promises, or expectations. Then she gently released him. I still need to leave Blackwood. Pain crossed Adrian's face, but he nodded. Then you should. Emily looked toward the mountains beyond the windows. Her father's name had been restored. Her past no longer controlled her future. Now, for the first time in her life, she needed to discover who she was when she was no longer running from anything. Emily left Blackwood 3 days later with one suitcase, her father's restored records, and no promise about when she would return. Adrian walked with her to the palace entrance, but did not ask her to stay. That restraint made leaving more difficult than any argument could have. Where will you go? He asked. I do not know yet. Emily looked toward the road beyond the gates. For once, that does not frighten me. Adrian gave her a quiet smile. Good. She waited for him to say something more. He did not. No declaration designed to change her mind. No royal offer disguised as a reason to remain. Emily stepped closer and touched his hand. You saved my life. Adrian shook his head gently. I kept you warm until you could save the rest of it yourself. Her eyes filled with emotion, but she smiled. You really have been learning. Slowly. Emily laughed, then turned toward the waiting car. Adrian remained at the palace entrance until it disappeared beyond the gates. The weeks that followed carried Emily farther from Blackwood than she had traveled in years. She visited the town where her father had grown up. She met families who remembered Jonathan before his name became associated with betrayal. She sat with people who told stories about his kindness, his terrible jokes, and his habit of helping neighbors without expecting recognition. For the first time, Emily began knowing her father as a man rather than as a tragedy. She also began building a life that belonged entirely to her. Using part of the compensation awarded after the investigation, she established a small foundation supporting families whose lives had been damaged by false public accusations and sealed government records. She refused every offer to attach the Blackwood name to the project. Adrian understood why. They spoke occasionally, never on a schedule. Sometimes their conversations lasted an hour. Sometimes only 5 minutes. Adrian never asked when she was coming back. Emily never promised that she would. Meanwhile, Blackwood changed. Adrian created permanent, independent oversight for the royal archives and transferred authority over historical investigations away from the crown. Marcus remained his chief advisor, but no inherited instruction could remain hidden from review. Adrian also reopened cases sealed during his father's reign, knowing that Jonathan Carter might not have been the only person sacrificed in the name of stability. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. One evening, Adrian returned alone to the hunting lodge in the northern forest. He had avoided the place since Emily left, though he could not fully explain why. Inside, everything looked smaller than he remembered. The chair beside the eastern window remained exactly where Emily had preferred it. Adrian stood there for a long time before noticing something on the table. A white rose. Fresh. Beside it lay the silver pendant Emily had worn when he found her. Adrian's heart stopped for one impossible second. He turned toward the open doorway. Emily stood on the porch wearing a simple blue coat, her long chestnut hair moving gently in the spring wind. She looked healthier than the woman he had carried through the snow, but the greatest difference was in her eyes. There was no fear in them now. Adrian walked toward her, then stopped several feet away. How long have you been here? Long enough to discover you still make terrible coffee. He laughed, and the sound seemed to release months of distance between them. I thought you needed to find out who you were away from Blackwood. I did. Adrian waited. Emily stepped inside and looked around the lodge. I found someone who can make her own decisions. Someone who does not need a king to give her a future. I am glad. She turned toward him. But I also found someone who misses a man named Adrian. The words left him silent. Emily smiled softly. Do not misunderstand. I am not moving into your palace tomorrow. I would never assume that. Good answer. Adrian smiled, but emotion had already reached his eyes. Emily moved closer. I came back because I wanted to know whether what happened between us was real when there was no storm, no investigation, and no one left to save. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. And how do we find out? Emily glanced toward the forest where he had once found her barely conscious beneath the snow. We start again. She offered him her hand. Adrian took it carefully. This time, neither of them was rescuing the other. They were simply two people standing at the beginning of something they were finally free to choose. Then Emily looked toward the trees and quietly said, "There is one place I need to see before we decide what comes next." Adrian followed her gaze and understood. Somewhere beyond those pines was the exact place where their story had begun. The path into the forest looked different beneath the soft light of spring. Months earlier, snow had buried the ground beneath several feet of white, turning every tree into a shadow and every direction into a question. Now sunlight passed through green branches, birds moved between the pines, and a narrow trail followed the hillside toward the place Adrian remembered too clearly. Emily walked beside him without speaking. She wore the silver pendant again, but it no longer felt like the last surviving piece of a stolen past. Her father's name had been restored. His choices had been understood. The pendant was simply hers now. After nearly a mile, Adrian slowed beside a small clearing. "Here," he said quietly. Emily stopped. There was nothing remarkable about the place. A fallen tree rested near a cluster of stones, and new grass covered the ground where Adrian had once found her barely conscious in the winter cold. Emily looked around for a long time. "I remember almost nothing about that night." "That may be a kindness." She glanced at him. "What do you remember?" Adrian looked toward the fallen tree. "I remember thinking I was too late." Emily's expression softened. "But you were not." "No, you carried me all the way to the lodge?" "Most of the way." "How far?" "Nearly 2 miles." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And you never complained about that part." "I am complaining now." She laughed, and Adrian smiled. The sound belonged here more naturally than the silence that had once surrounded them. Emily walked toward the center of the clearing and looked up through the trees. "For years, I thought my life began with what happened to my father. Everything I did somehow led back to that loss." Adrian joined her, but left enough space for her to choose whether to close the distance. She did. "Then I came here," she continued. "I thought this forest was where my life almost ended. But it was actually the first place where I stopped living inside someone else's decision." Adrian looked at her. "You did that yourself." "Not entirely." Emily took his hand. "Someone gave me enough time to choose." They stood together as the afternoon light moved across the clearing. There was no palace around them, no council, no investigation, and no history demanding an answer. Adrian was not asking her to become part of his world. Emily was not asking him to abandon it. For the first time, their future did not need to be decided by fear. "My foundation is opening an office in Blackwood," Emily said. Adrian turned toward her in surprise. "You never mentioned that." "I wanted to make the decision before telling you." "That sounds familiar. I learned from watching powerful men make mistakes." Adrian laughed softly. "Will you be living there?" "Part of the year. Maybe more. I have not decided." He nodded. "Then you will decide when you are ready." Emily studied him with a smile. "You really did learn." Slowly, she stepped closer. "There is one thing I have decided." Adrian waited. Emily's voice became quieter. "I love you." For once, the Alpha King had no carefully measured answer. He simply looked at the woman he had once found beneath the snow and understood how completely she had changed his life without ever asking permission to do so. "I love you too," he said. Emily smiled, and when Adrian opened his arms, she chose to step into them. He held her gently beneath the same trees that had once witnessed the beginning of their story. Months later, when Emily officially opened the Carter Justice Foundation in Blackwood, Adrian attended without a crown, without a royal announcement, and without standing at the center of the room. The foundation belonged to her. Her future belonged to her. And when the ceremony ended, they left together through the front doors as equals choosing the same road. Jonathan Carter's restored name remained written in Blackwood's history, but Emily no longer lived beneath its shadow. Adrian continued changing the institutions his father had taught him never to question, while Emily built something designed to protect people whose voices powerful systems had ignored. Their life together did not become a perfect story. They disagreed. They spent time apart when their responsibilities demanded it. They learned that love was not proven by rescue, sacrifice, or grand declarations. It was proven by freedom freely given and trust repeatedly earned. Years later, a single white rose still appeared every spring at the hunting lodge. Not as a memorial to the night Emily nearly disappeared in the forest, but as a reminder of what came after. A woman survived. A king learned to release control. Two inherited histories were finally allowed to end. And in the place where Adrian once fought only to keep Emily alive, they built a future neither of them had been born expecting, one choice at a time.